Okay, joining us now to discuss Dan Geltrude. He's an adjunct accounting professor at Montclair State University. Dan, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Good morning.
Okay, let's get started here. Inflation. Maybe they're going to do a rate cut, maybe not in March here. How do you see this playing out? I still see more uncertainty. You would know better than I, though. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that it's time for a rate cut at all because, as Betsy was just saying, it's not like we don't have inflation. We just have inflation that's increasing less than it had been. And anytime you're looking at inflation, you have to look at its cumulative impact. So you need to go back approximately 3 years and say, okay, where were we then and where are we now? So when you talk about inflation only going up, let's say 3%, well, that's really not true, because when you look at the cumulative total, it's close to 20%. And that's what Americans are feeling when they go to the store in buying anything they need. They're feeling the pain.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was just thinking about grocery shopping. And the fact is that what you could buy in 2019 for $100 at the grocery store now costs you $121.50. And yet we had Joe Biden delivering a speech to a political dinner in South Carolina last night, and he was saying that Americans are getting sucker punched by the grocery store. Yeah. It's not the grocery store, is it, Dan?
No, it's not. The truth here is that grocery stores really have very, very low margins. They rely on volume in order to be profitable, which means they have no choice as their prices are going up than to pass those price increases along. Otherwise, they literally would be losing money on their products. And in a capitalistic society, that's not how we work. Maybe the government operates that way, and maybe they can operate that way because they can print their own money. But in reality, the rest of us can't. So we have to actually work on having more revenue than expenses. So you certainly can't blame the grocery stores for rising prices.
That's just a little story here, guys. I stocked shelves in college at a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
I broke a jar of peppers one time, and the manager said, do you know how many of these we're going to have to sell just to get back to zero? So Dan is right.
Absolutely.
It is all about volume sales. We have very low margins here. And when we talk about 20% inflation over the course of 3 years under Biden here, Dan, let's talk about disposable income. That's where the families really get hit hard, and then that has a trickle effect on the economy here. So you think about after your necessary expenses, your mortgage, your rent, maybe a car payment if you're lucky enough to have one. But then how about that family vacation that you want to go on? That money, gone. What about getting the instruments for your kids, putting them in a certain athletic league or a club, tutoring, things like that? That's where it suffers, and then it's a domino effect across the board here. Do you see that happening? If not yet, do you see it coming?
Oh, it's absolutely happening. And the metrics that you need to look at here is wage inflation versus overall inflation, meaning wages are not going up as much as inflation has gone up. So if your spending stays the same in terms of the things that you want to buy, you're absolutely going to end up with less money. And to further look at the data, you see savings accounts are dropping and credit card debt is increasing. So what's happening is that people are simply financing everything they need to do. Now, eventually, that bill becomes due. And when it does, well, that's when the economy really feels the pain, because people simply can't make their payments and they start to default.
Yeah, those credit card rates are killers. A lot of people watching this morning are hoping to buy a home. And
good luck.
Yeah. Tell us what the situation is. They want to know whether they should buy now or wait. Inventory is short. Mortgage rates. Give us all some advice about home buying.
Sure. So let's look at what's really happening right now. And to start with, you have low inventory, and that's really what's driving and keeping the prices so high. But now we have to go behind that and say, well, why is the inventory so low? It means that people are not selling their homes. So why aren't they are selling their homes? So the question there is it okay, They're not selling because when they go to buy another home, you're going to have a higher mortgage rate than what you had. Many people would be looking at downsizing, let's say, and they look at that and say, well, we're going to have a smaller house and our monthly payments may actually be higher. So therefore, we're going to stay put. So until we start to get some relief on those mortgage rates, where people would then be incentivized to sell, we're going to have the same problem. Now, the question becomes, well, if you're a buyer, what do you do? Well, you can sit back and wait. That's one approach. Or you look at it and say, the market is uncertain. If I really find the house I love, I'm going to buy it. And then hopefully at some point rates will come down. I'll have the ability to refinance and therefore take that monthly payment down.
Dan, would you think that getting our energy independence, our energy dominance back like it was under the previous administration, former President Trump, would that be a solid start to maybe tamping this all down? It all starts with that. Then after you buy your fuel, you ship your products. Then you price appropriately across the board here. Do you think that's what needs to happen?
That is absolutely what needs to happen. That is the starting point, right? We have the ability, and choose not to, be energy independent. And when we do that, because everything that we purchase, right, requires energy to go from point A to point B. So when you have energy costs going up, because what we're doing here is we're going to rely on countries who are not our friends to supply us with that energy. So we're beholden to them. We're literally taken hostage because we're relying outside of our own country for energy when we don't have to. Not only can we supply enough energy for our country to use, we could be selling that energy and actually be making money. So it makes no sense whatsoever why we're not driving down that path.
Good point. Now, we've talked about what young home buyers need to know, but what about the people at the other end of the age spectrum who are basically savers? Many of them are living on their savings. They liked those high interest rates because suddenly a T-bill was, paying 6 or 7%. What should they be doing now?
Well, right now you do have some pretty good interest rates for those that are really going to be relying on saving and retirement. So it's probably a pretty good situation for them, as opposed to when interest rates were much lower and it was difficult to make your savings go further. So I think right now, in terms of being a retiree, you're probably in a pretty good place. But I do believe over time you are going to see those rates start to drop. And because of that, the key is to be able to diversify any savings you have to hedge against whether interest rates are going up or going down.
Let's talk about the stock market hitting all-time highs a couple days ago. I think last week, S&P 500. A lot of people, I think, need to understand that what institutions will do, they'll stick their money in stocks to protect just against inflation here. When times are good in realty, it's cheap. Mortgage rates are down. They'll go into realty. So when it's kind of disjointed, so to speak, and when we're seeing these record stock numbers here, doesn't necessarily represent that things are going well, especially under this Biden administration. Now, to the contrary, under former President Trump, you had record stock numbers. You also had low inflation.
Yeah, that was a good combo.
That's where it syncs up and does very well. Stocks high, high inflation. That's the disjoint here. Dan, can you elaborate?
Sure. So what happens here is that people equate what happens in the stock market to what's going on in the economy. Now, they're related, but they're really independent of each other for the most part. You could absolutely have a mutual exclusion between the two, and that's what we've been seeing. We've seen the economy sputtering along because of high inflation, but yet the stock market setting records. And the reason for that is because you have people that are looking at high inflation and they're saying, how can I keep up with inflation? Well, you look at the stock market and the stock market is doing well, so people are putting their money into the market, and the more money that goes into the market fuels the market. So I think that's what we've been seeing here. And plus, a lot of what's going on in the stock market is being driven by technology, all these breakthroughs related to artificial intelligence. I mean, really, it's almost limitless as to where that can all go. And I think there's a lot of investors out there that are very confident and they're very bullish about where things are going to go related to advances in technology.
What about buying a car, Dan?
Oh, again, good luck with that. No cars to buy.
Listen, if I was in the market for a car right now, I would not be buying an EV in spite of what the government may be telling me. And the reason for that is simply because they're too damn expensive. It's just not worth it. Look, I think the best place to go to if you need a car is the used car market, because you can really get a solid used car at a reasonable price, hopefully, as opposed to what the costs are for new cars, especially when you're talking about EVs. The savings are just not there when you're talking about plugging in versus going to a gas station. The difference just doesn't make sense.
Dan,
I saved a lot of money buying a used car. You know, the first time you drive a new car off the lot, you really lose a lot of money.
Wasn't it like 30% value as soon as it goes off the lot? Yeah, that's what it does. Dan, any final thoughts here as we bring this to a conclusion? Anything else you wanted to highlight for us?
Well, look, the last thing is that we have a potential tax cut that just passed the House. Is it going to make it through the Senate? We'll have to see. But listen, just the thought of a tax cut is also fueling more of the stock market. The stock market loves tax cuts. More money in people's pockets, more money goes into the stock market.
I like that optimistic end. Thank you, Dan.
Dan, thank you. Between all the doom and gloom at the border and around the world, we had a bright spot here at the end with you. We appreciate it.
And don't forget to look for those asteroids up in the sky tonight.
That's right, 4 of them. Okay?